So afternoon, everyone. I think I've pressed the right button. Let's see. Welcome along to another Talented People live session. We've done a few of these things now. We're getting used to it on a Friday. So thank you, everybody, for following us and joining us. And on this lovely sunny Friday, I hope if you're watching this on a phone or tablet or something, at least you're outside making the most of the weather. As you sort of all start to join, I'll just tell you a little bit about these sessions. Well, firstly, thank you so much for those of you who keep coming back to watch them and sending us such lovely emails. It's been phenomenal, genuinely. We just sort of started doing these in March just because we felt suddenly the world was so different and we were all in our houses and we just wanted to do something that kept everybody connected, and the feedback has been great and it feels like a lovely thing to do. And I'm just loving doing them as well and talking to such brilliant people. And actually, because of the business we're in, being a production staffing company and executive search company, we have the major advantage of knowing lots of very talented people and lovely people and contacts. So it sort of felt like the very natural thing for us to do, to be bringing these sessions to you and basically having a nice chat about something that's interesting to keep you guys entertained and informed. We tend to do these sessions once a week. Just keep an eye on our social feeds for when they're coming up. And you can find them all afterwards, by the way. So if you join this one late or you didn't realize we did other ones, they're all on our website, which is talentedpeople.tv. So this session is all about the edit. Always a brilliant talking point, never any training really, or much enough in it. And we have two amazing guests who have been there, done that, been around the block and certainly know their stuff. Jo Woolf. Hello, Jo.
Hi there.
Jo is a series producer and senior edit producer who we've known for a long time. And her recent credits are things like Big Flower Fight from Netflix, 21 Again, BBC Three, Hidden Britain by Drone on Channel 4. And she tells me she's edit produced over 100 hours of television. Now, maybe that's not a lot for some of you other kind of edit stalwarts, but it's pretty spectacular. And she worked with Paddy, who I'm about to introduce, on the first series of The Choir, Military Wives and First Dates. And Jo also runs these unicorn training courses, as we talk about. There's not enough of those in edit producing, and her own mentoring and coaching service. But she says this is the first time actually she's been on a session to talk with an editor about that particular working dynamic. So this should be fun. And Paddy, hello, Paddy.
Hello.
Thank you for coming along. I don't think you do a lot of this kind of thing, so I feel very grateful.
I've just been thinking on that intro, sorry to interrupt you, but it's a bit like, I suppose I'm breaking ranks a little bit, because it's a bit like the magician's circle. You know, whenever you don't give away how you do your magic tricks.
Yeah,
gotta be careful what I say.
So wow, or do you? Is this perhaps the one time we wheel you out and then you go back into that magician's lair, never to be seen ever again? You're just found in a dark basement. Yeah.
Yes, it's a safe space, isn't it? This is a safe space.
This is a safe space of industry nice people, so you're all right. It's all good. But Paddy started off as a runner, as all the best people do. Hey, Paddy, in a Soho post-production facility, worked his way up the ranks and then became a full-time offline editor in 1997. There was this little series that you might have heard of that he got his first proper break on, called Grand Designs, in 98. And he helped set up a Soho post house called The Station in 2000 and worked there for 8 years before going freelance. So he tends to do docs and features, right, Paddy? But you've also done short form stuff as well.
Yeah, a little bit of reality as well. I did First Dates with Jo. Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh god, when I say brilliant, I feel like the guy from W1A, so you must stop me saying that. Brilliant. So I mean, this is such an interesting topic. Where do we start? Jo, I suppose I remember the first time I walked into an edit suite as a PD and I'd been given my first edit, and I walked in, I had a lovely editor, Neil Buckley, if you're watching. And I didn't understand what I should be doing and what he should be doing, and whether I needed to be, as a mid 20-year-old, probably looking relative newbie, how I could possibly exert any influence over what he was supposed to do and how that relationship works. So I guess, how would you describe that relationship for people who, both for the people who are kind of starting out in the edit and for those who kind of aren't always sure how to go about it?
Well, that's a very big question, and one of the most crucial ones, I'd say. I was lucky that I started in the industry when PDs went into the edit. So I started cutting down and working with editor on my own material, which I think is a really good starting point. And also I got in, I think my first directing breaks were also on sort of schemes for new talent. So I got onto a Channel 4 scheme for new talent and an ITV scheme. So I was kind of given an editor who was told, oh, Jo hasn't cut her own stuff before. So I was sort of given like free rein to ask a lot of questions and be a bit sort of innocent about it. And to be honest, I am the sort of person who doesn't mind asking stupid questions and I never ever pretend I know things that I don't know. And so I probably would have been, you know, badgering the editor to tell me things and saying, oh, do you mind? Oh, is this okay? Whatever. But what I think with new edit producers is it is actually very, very intimidating going in with an editor, because often the editors are very experienced, and there can be this real anxiety of, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know who's in control. I don't want to be too much of a pain asking too many questions, but also, and I do want to have some creative input. I don't want to be just sitting here. And I think with experience, obviously that confidence grows. But what I would say is, don't pretend to be what you're not. And I always advise people, you know, because people your editor will know if you're not experienced. They will work that out pretty soon. And it's much better to sort of share the dilemma and sort of say, look, this is one of my first, and things have gone wrong before, but I really want to be involved. I've got lots of ideas. Can we find out a way where we're both contributing? Because, you know, I want to be involved and I don't want to be just, you know, the assistant or whatever. I don't want to hold you back, but at the same time, I want to feel that I'm being involved. So
being honest and upfront about where you're at, and you know what experience you have is important. Paddy, would you agree with that? Do you often work with new edit producers?
Occasionally, yeah. And most productions, whenever you get a new edit producer, they'll tell you that this person's on their first break, or you know, you're usually prepared for that. So you've got a bit of history, and sometimes you get chosen to be that person, to help that person through. I think starting a new job, it's, as Jo was saying, if you're young and starting out, you know, it's fear of the unknown. It's normal sort of anxiety. It's not just going into an edit. It's something that you've never done before. And as Jo says, the more you do it, the more second nature it becomes. So a lot of it will be, you'll be nervous about going into a completely new environment, but also you've never been in, but also you're probably fairly experienced, and because of that, you're fairly inexperienced. And if you are yourself, and if you've got a half decent editor, they'll spend that bit of time helping you through. And it's all about getting on with people. And, you know, I will probably say that loads of times over the next 40 minutes, you know what I mean? It's just about getting on with people and trying to get the best out of people. And if you are yourself and you are honest about your experience, then for an editor, generally it's about creating a good experience for everybody in the room. And the only thing is, you just got to crack on at some stage and get something done. So you've got to put your faith in the editor a little bit and hope that the editor knows what they're doing. And you know,
it does feel like quite a kind of vulnerable place to be. I know that's how I felt. You know, you're especially, well, I don't know actually, but I had shot the stuff that I was edit producing, so I suddenly felt like I was being confronted with my rushes on a big screen, and actually having not done that before, barely been in the edit before, it suddenly makes you so embarrassed about what you didn't get, and what, you know, how shaky your shot was, or what you're missing, that really you're already on a kind of quite self-conscious feeling.
And that sort of never really goes away. I mean, I guess whenever you become very experienced as a PD, you know, there's always that, there's the emotional attachment to your rushes, and then there's the fear of not having got it right. And you know, if you're young, you're basically being locked in a room with somebody you've never met before, or probably met before, and expected to do something with them. You know, it's a weird dynamic for the editor and for the person who's the edit producer, whether they're a young PD, an AP moving up to be a PD, or a young edit producer. You know what I mean? It is a weird situation, and to some extent, it's always, you know, it's always a little bit like that, but you learn to deal with it more as you get more and more experience. But
and I guess you're used to kind of people coming in and out a lot, Paddy, as well. You know, if all of your gigs are generally, I don't know, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or longer series, you have the churn.
Yeah, and some jobs you're starting with a new PD or edit producer every 8 weeks. You know what I mean? So you know, the editor will be used to it a lot more than the person coming in. But,
yes.
Yeah, I think the good thing is, with an edit producer, they nowadays generally 99% of the time haven't shot it, so they haven't got that anxiety that you were mentioning about being embarrassed about their rushes. Also, I think another good thing is that the first sort of third of an edit, in my experience, is generally spent watching the vast amount of material that you've got to play with. Say if you're doing a 1 hour, you might have like 200 hours of footage, and everybody has watched television before, and everybody has the ability, you don't have to be very technical, but to watch things and make a note of the time codes where they appear. So that first 2 weeks, say, of a 7-week edit is a good time for the editor and the edit producer, I would say, to both sort of divide the material, work out who's watching what, and you can be getting to know each other and sort of talking, but you're sort of not really making big creative decisions at the beginning, I'd say, in most programs. So it's sort of getting familiar with the material and getting familiar with each other, and working out how each other works. And we're all quite British and don't necessarily talk very openly, like, oh, you know, what do you most like do? I don't know. I mean, but we're not necessarily, there's a lot of unspoken communication that goes on to work out, like, you know, you work out, oh, he takes his lunch at midday, and, you know, that sort of thing. And then slowly over that viewing period, you kind of work out a sort of working relationship, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. So sort of in the first couple of weeks, it's almost like a getting to know you, watch the material. Well, it depends how much time you've got, I suppose. But yes, getting to know you and figuring out, rather than sort of coming in and going, this is what, as an edit producer, this is what I'm going to do. I'm doing this, you're doing that. Would that be a better approach than, Paddy? Do you prefer that when you kind of figure it out together? What we know in terms of division of labour.
There's no job that is the same. I mean, sometimes some returning formats become quite formulaic in the way they get put together. So you can't come up with a working method, and you know that you're all going to stick to that. But you know, if it's an obs doc and the PD shot it, some of it might be transcribed. The master interviews might be transcribed. The editor will want to have a quick look at the rushes. More and more these days, there isn't the time to sit and look at everything. You know, you've just got to crack on with the story. But from my point of view, the edit producer generally would look at transcripts and mark up transcripts if there are transcripts, or go to key scenes that they know that they're going to use in the film. Because, you know, if it's an obs doc shot over 9 months or 6 months, you know, and they've shot it, you know that some stuff's just never going to make it, and you would never look at that. But so you'll pick a key scene, and try and start somewhere in an obs doc. I mean, more and more they're produced on the shoot these days. So, you know, there's a very clear idea of the story that you're going to tell in that particular episode, and you just, like Jo says, you break it down. You know, Jo would look at some key scenes. I'd look at other scenes, and we just work out with the rushes that we have there and then who does what, and just make a start. I mean, the first thing is that you've got to work towards a viewing. They're going to be, the bosses are going to want to see something fairly quickly. So you've got to work out what's the most important thing to show them, and then from that, you work out who does what. But
that's an interesting point.
Way of doing it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So you still, obviously, like you say, you have to, you know what you need to work with, but at the same time, I think always having some kind of target in your mind is important, isn't it? Or else you could just start from the beginning and end up cutting stuff that isn't as important. If you know you've got, you know, your boss coming.
They always want to see stuff soon to make sure that we're all going in the right direction. Because when you invest a lot of time going in the wrong direction, it's a lot of production time wasted. But anyway, we're rushing ahead a little bit. We're talking about
no, that's fine. So Jo, shall we take it right back then to, perhaps there are some people who are watching this who've never been in an edit. Do you want to talk about what an edit producer actually does?
Okay, well, I think this is something that a lot of people want to know, because it even some, I think, SPs and execs and commissioners don't know what's going on in that little room. It's kind of obvious what an editor is doing, because they're obviously putting the thing together, but the edit producer, it is a bit more of a nebulous task. So I would say that with these shows where there are vast amount of material, that dividing and conquering between the editor and the edit producer is part of the job. It's sort of like choosing which material you're going to watch rather than the editor, and siphoning it down. I think also the edit producer can be sort of having a bigger picture, like watching other episodes of the same series, thinking about the broad brushstrokes sort of structure, whilst the editor is maybe more crafting smaller sections. I think there's a lot of discussion between the edit producer and the editor as well, and I think the two brains in the edit is really, really helpful, because I think sometimes the storylines that people intended to shoot aren't necessarily coming through in the suite, and having two people trying to figure out, right, not only what were they trying to say, but what are the rushes saying to us, or what could we do with the rushes that is going to be the best, and where is the beginning, middle and end of that story. That actually having two people working it out, when sometimes it's quite difficult, either because there's so much material, so you need to share, divide and conquer your knowledge of the material, or just because real life that they planned to shoot in advance never quite works out the way that you expect. So you kind of, in the edit, are sort of maybe reframing the story, or tweaking it so that you are telling a story that you've actually got the footage to tell.
So perhaps almost largely, as an edit producer, you're able to sort of look at the bigger picture more as well, while the editor is refining the detail?
Well, partly, although I think editors, I'm really nervous about saying things that editors would be throwing daggers at me. So, but partly that, but it's also, I think it tends to be that the edit producer is doing the scripting in the later stages. So when the editor, once you've kind of worked out, so first stage is sort of watching, next stage is sort of working out what is the best material that you need. And then when it gets more to the crafting stage, I'd say generally for me, the editor is more doing the beautiful crafting and polishing and music and cutaways and, you know, the actual craft of editing. Whereas I will be honing down the script that goes around the sync in each scene, and I will be rewriting that. So that's a good division of labor in the kind of middle stages of the edit. And then I think in the comments and the end stages, I think often the edit producer is sort of who the series producer and execs talk to with their notes, which isn't always actually a particularly nice position to be in. But and so you're sort of the funnel, or taking the brunt of the comments for your team. But I always like to involve the editor in that, because I feel like we've made everything so far as a team. Let's talk to the layers above us as a team as well.
Paddy, how about you? How do you, or do you want to tell us then what your role is as editor?
So the first thing is to get the sync. It's all driven around sync normally. So the first thing is to get the sync of the contributor sync down. Doesn't need to be overcut too quickly. It can be quite long, but the sync needs to make sense. There needs to be a beginning, middle and end as a starting point for a scene. Once you've got that, then the edit producer can then write some commentary to introduce the scene, to take us from one bit of a scene to the next. Because quite often, as Jo sort of mentioned, you haven't always got every ingredient to make a scene work. So sometimes you can get the contributor to speak and tell the story through the sync, but sometimes it's just a lot quicker to throw a line of commentary at it and just cut out a massive part of the story. So the editors generally work with the sync as a rule to start with the edit producer, and then the edit producer will generally write and then produce from that sync. Quite often we'll get a sync pool, which is all the usable sync. We'll work it out into a rough story. If you look at a scene that's an average scene on telly is a minute or 2 minutes, your first pull might be 4 or 5 minutes. You'll go through it together. They might want to the edit producer might want to transcribe that. Very often it's easier to understand what people are saying by reading it off a page. You know, it sounds very strange, but you watch telly and you listen to what they're saying. But actually, when it comes to editing, some edit producers and PDs like to transcribe the longer versions of the scene first, so they've got all of the sync on a script, and then they can kind of like look at it as a jigsaw puzzle and remove bits of sync to streamline it, and then they sort of edit it for you into some, you know, they can edit it for you, and then they say, look, we don't need all of that bit, we can do it as a line of comm, here's a line of comm to get into the scene, and this is where we want to end the scene. And by spreading the work like that, you end up by refining the rushes. You can't just go, generally speaking, you can't just look at a load of rushes and make a scene out of it. It takes hours and hours and hours, and it's not a good idea to overcut too early. I like to refine stuff down rather than making, sometimes you can make very big decisions very, very quickly, but sometimes the best way is just to go through it slowly and work it out slowly, because you can't just edit everything in a day. This is why edits take 8 weeks. You know what I mean? Nothing happens that quickly, and you shouldn't feel overly pressured to make things feel cut overly quickly. A big mistake is to cut a scene, put music on it, put cutaways on it, put a bit of guide comm on it, and think that because it's edited, because it's got music, because it's got commentary, that scene is sort of good enough. It very often isn't, and it's usually rushing a scene like that means that you've got to unpick it again when the exec sees it or the next person sees it.
Right.
And you've got to go back, and
you almost lose a bit of its soul if you cut it down too quick, because you don't understand the context, or you forget.
Yes, you forget what the scene's really about, but you're more interested in taking away the jump cuts and putting music on it, and actually not thinking about what the sync is. So,
yes. So those are the two separate roles. Yeah. I was going to ask now, Paddy, how do you see the relationship? What works best for you when you are sitting in your suite and you've got a deadline?
I don't think there's a particular rule. You've got to judge it on the person you sat next to. It depends how hands-on they want to be. My starting point is, let's see how they want to operate, how the edit producer wants to run it, how hands-on they are, and then make a decision based on that. If they've got an idea of how they want to break it down, and it sounds plausible, let's go with that to start with. Let's give it a go, because we can talk for hours and never get anything done. So but with more experience, you can go, well, hang on, why don't we start it this way round, or let's split it in two. But I'm perhaps a little bit too accommodating. I want to create an environment where the person sat next to me can be themselves. I don't want to dictate how to do something in particular, because I find if you start to force an idea down somebody's neck, then they either resist that, or they go with it and go into autopilot and just assume you know what you're doing. And all of those ways are, I don't particularly like forcing anything on anybody. I think it is a collaboration, and it should be a collaboration. If you've worked with somebody before a lot, then you can cut all of that.
You can shortcut all that.
It's easier, but our audience today is generally for new people who are coming fresh to it, I think.
Yeah. And Jo, you started talking about, you feel that it's a collaboration as well, and that works very well, to be honest, as soon as you walk into that suite and say, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm thinking. What do you feel, what hasn't worked for you in the past, or not necessarily specific examples, but what do you think doesn't work between the edit producer and editor?
So I think what I'd say is it's absolutely lovely most of the time, and with most people, most editors and edit producers are real people and are both willing to adapt to each other's styles. But I always compare it slightly to an arranged marriage, where you haven't chosen who you're with, unless for some reason you're with somebody you've worked with before or whatever. So you are kind of plonked together, and the chemistry might not be there. And it's also, I also slightly compare it to being a Siamese twin, because especially for the edit producer, there are times when they actually can't get going with the program. They can't move program with the program unless the editor is agreeing to edit. There are lots of times in the edit where you can work separately when you're scripting or viewing or whatever, but there's certain times, like when you're doing changes or when you're trying to get a scene to work that you both know isn't going to work, and where if they're not playing ball, you know, you feel really frustrated because you can't do it yourself. You can't physically edit yourself. So I feel in a way at times like that, it feels a little bit like the editor has the power because they physically can press the buttons. So I think that kind of, when there's a bit of a standoff, the only times that has really happened to me are when it can be that different people have sort of different ways of working hours, I'd say. Like some people just sort of come alive at like 6 p.m. and want to work till 3 in the morning, and that they actually come in the next day and kind of say, oh yeah, oh, it was a really mad day. Yeah, it was in the edit suite till 3 a.m. Whereas for me, I really do not want to be with somebody who comes alive after 6 p.m. I want somebody who works really hard 9 to 6 and then can go home. But there's some people who literally, for some reason, they can't focus in those hours and they just keep going for loo breaks. And they keep doing that. And I know equally editors get annoyed and have this joke that edit producers are always shopping and on Facebook and, you know, they've got the cushy number. But sometimes it also does seem that you're working with editors who are going through a divorce or trying to buy a house or trying to do something else, and they are constantly focused on something. I mean, we all have life issues, so I understand it, but it's just when you've got a tight deadline and you can't do it yourself, it can be quite frustrating when the other person isn't wanting to work in the same sort of time frame and at the same energy that you are. Yes,
that makes total sense. And actually I know that there's a lot of grumblings about being on the internet and being on Facebook and stuff at the back of the edit. I mean, Paddy, how do you find that? What are the sort of most annoying things that you find about working in this sort of very close relationship?
No, I don't find anything particularly annoying. I think I think there's nothing wrong with being on Facebook and shopping. If the edit producer's got all the comm and they've got all, you know, the stories in good shape, you know, a lot of the, you know, quite frankly, the editors does have to do quite a lot of work after the edit producer's done all their work. So I don't, the thing that bothers me most is lack of communication. If, you know, you need to keep talking. You know, some editors will want to go away and work on their own and not do a lot of talking. I'm not really like that. I do like, you know, all editors need time to work on their own. They can't, if an edit producer gives them a line of comm and it's 18 seconds long, and then another line of comm and that's another 18 seconds long, you know, the editor needs time to put that in, which is very, very quick, but you need to cover that with shots. You need to make that work. You know, the editor does need to work on their own, or, you know, without talking for long periods of time. But lack of communication is the biggest problem in the edit, and that goes for the dynamic within the edit, the four walls within the edit, but also more importantly outside of the edit. You know what I mean? You need to have a good line of communication with your series producers, or, you know, your exec, you know, not a line of communication with the channel, but, you know, you all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet, really. And quite often when things go wrong, it's because there's been a break in that line of communication. And sometimes, I mean, editing is generally about trying to fix things that have gone wrong, or, you know, you're trying to tell a story and you're trying to get from A to C, but very often B is missing. So, you know, if everything was there and everything was shot as per the script, things would go together really well. And, you know, if the commissioners liked it, then, you know, that would all be happy days. But people have opinions, you know, very often, you know, people outside the edit have a different idea of precisely what it is that you're trying to do. You develop your own ideas and you go off on a little tangent. And if you don't communicate with your superiors, you can go down the wrong road, and all of a sudden days are wasted, and then they're really angry because you haven't done what they've said. And that, all of that usually comes from a lack of communication. So I think communication is key. Communication
and mutual respect about each other's roles, and
you've got to get along. I mean, if you don't get along with somebody, that's tough. You know.
And what do you do in that? Have you ever had situations where something is really not working?
Yeah, I have had that, but I've not really had situations where I've not got along with somebody. You know, I've had situations where I've found somebody difficult and I've spoken to them about it, and actually it's ended up being brilliant. You know what I mean? I think just honesty and being direct and knowing that you've got, this is just an annoyance for everybody. You sometimes it's just better to speak to people if you feel confident to do that, you know.
Yes.
But
Jo, would you agree with that? I mean, have you ever had any difficult situations with your editor that you've had to figure out how to resolve?
Yes, I have had difficult situations. I mean, sometimes it's been because of pressure from outside, because trying to interpret what other people want, because just as two heads coming together have, you know, different opinions, and those opinions can be really great, two people interpreting comments can have different interpretations, and you're trying to fix something as quickly as possible, but you both remember or analyze what the comment that you've scrolled down that they said, that the commissioner or the exec said as they were leaving the room.
Yeah.
You know, you might both interpret it differently, and then that can be quite stressful. But I mean, yeah, communication. I mean, I try to be really diplomatic, and I try to, if possible, you know, well, let's try both approaches. I also try to be honest about, you know, look, we are, you know, about, I just try to be open and honest, and then it tends to work. I mean, people either like it or they don't like it, and sometimes you can have a really bad day, and then, you know,
the next day's all good.
You come back the next day and you say, look, yesterday was relationship. You know, you can have arguments, ups and downs, disagreements, but if you can get over them, then you know, it's okay. I sound like I'm like the edit producer from hell. I'm honestly, I don't have lots of arguments.
No, but like we said at the beginning,
I'm just trying to be honest.
It's very intense. It's intense, isn't it? It's like, you know, even on a shoot, you don't have that level of intensity necessarily. You're in the same room, same people, 6 weeks, 8 weeks longer. It's hardcore. And if you don't quite know what you're doing, or you're not where you're at with somebody, it's exaggerated, isn't it? That feeling in the room is exaggerated. So no, this is useful. And people who watch these sessions always like to know the how you do something, or how, you know, just advice from people. This is all just opinion, but it's all sounds very smart and common sense.
I think the other thing to do is to think about how you want to be treated yourself. So I think that, look, if I was an editor, I would absolutely hate it if somebody was leaning over my shoulder and going, oh no, not that shot, not that shot, no, not that piece of music, and like literally nitpicking as you're going along. And so equally, when I'm writing my script, I don't want the editor keeping on commenting about, no, not that word, no, as you're doing it. You kind of need as a space to do something and then make your own assessment, which
and
is,
you know,
I think,
we're in a creative industry. Everything is so subjective anyway. Like you've just said, you know, notes are subjective. You know, both of you have different opinions. You've got to just somehow find a common ground and choose something and see if it works. We're going to take some questions in a minute, because lots of people are saying hello. So write your question in the comments, guys, and I'll chuck as many as I can at Jo and Paddy. I think you two, when you two worked together then, so you did First Dates, is that right?
First Dates.
Military Wives,
I mean, those are, First Dates certainly is a sort of a big machine, and I imagine super organized, but there's so much feeling in those programs. Every scene feels so personal. How do you work, how do you get those feelings into little scenes when they've got to be super short, and who chooses those sort of moments, because they're quite easy to miss, aren't they, when you're quickly trying to deliver?
Well, First Dates is a fairly well-oiled machine these days. The characters are obviously cast with a date in mind and with a story in mind, so you know why the individual is there normally, so there's an angle for them. And there's usually, everything's logged quite well. So there will be story beats that we will know about before we start cutting. And they're usually a good starting point. Quite often those starting points do change, which is quite hard work on First Dates. First Dates gets a bad rap. Well, it certainly did do in previous series.
Mm-hmm.
In the pub, you know, some editors would bitch about it, and generally it's because it's quite hard work. The 4 days, the story cuts are 4-day cycles. So Jo and I worked together for the first time in a few years on First Dates a couple of years ago, and we basically, you get a date, you get their interviews, and you get 4 days to cut the story. And the story is about, I don't know, what are they, 13 minutes when they leave the first cut, Joe?
Something
And
like
they're what the stories are watched on the second day of the edit, and the dates aren't cut, you know, so the editors have to, and the dates last about an hour and a half. So Joe will normally get tucked into the master interviews, which are transcribed, and I will break down the date into the bits that we want from the date. And with the notes that we've had from the shoot, and the fact that I will have watched the date, all the cameras on the date, we can pull out all the bits that we think we're going to want to use. And if we don't pull them out, I can log the bits. If there's a funny look or a reaction or something happens or everything's logged, you know, on top of the logs that are already there, or the editors will re-log them, so that when the execs come back in 2 days' time, say, actually, we want to use that bit where they went to the toilet because that was funny and it wasn't in your first cut. You can go straight to that and find it. So again, but that's, if you look at it like that, it's just a process of whittling it down. You know, you take your hour and a half date and you just whittle it down. So your first cut might only be 20 or 30 minutes, but you just start whittling it down. And quite often with first dates, you go back and find other things, you know, and quite often whenever the dates go into what they call the stitch, which is where they go into, you know, they get assembled with all the other dates in that particular episode, the stories get recut again and again. So there's a way that the editors need to log them, so that any other editor who picks it up in 4 months' time when they're compiling it or stitching it can then go back and find certain bits.
The extra shots
but
that
it's
you
just
need.
a case of whittling it down. But it's very fast because it's 4 days. You get 4 days to cut.
That's incredible.
And I think there's 2 viewings, Joe, in that, or 2 or 3 viewings in that 4-day cycle.
I think when I did it, there were 2 because you had, I think, have done a series after me, haven't you?
Yeah, but
so when I was there, I think there was 2 things. But what I really liked about it is that it's so minimal, the actuality, isn't it? It's so sort of prescriptive for each couple. You know, they walk in, they are at the bar, then they're at the restaurant. So there isn't a lot of action. So it's all about the dialogue. And it's all about writing. For me, I found it as an edit producer, it was all about finding the sync from each contributor that was characterful and quirky, but that when crunched down from 5 hours or whatever it is, 4 hours to 15 minutes, it still makes sense. And it's still, each sort of 4 bites of their conversation had interlinking sync. So it sounded like a natural conversation, when obviously it's not, it's much crunched down. And so there is quite an art form to it. And also you want, every day has to be different in some way. And having done so many series, it's really hard to make each date be really different from every other date that's gone before.
I just very quickly jump in. I started saying that first date's got a bad rep amongst some editors. That's because a lot of editors coming onto it had weeks and weeks to cut shows. And all of a sudden you're in a 4-day cycle where you're cutting a story in 4 days. In a normal 8-week cycle, the first couple of weeks, they're quite easy weeks. You know, you just get your head down, you work. And then all your hard work on a normal doc is done in the last 2 or 3 weeks. First dates, you get in within half an hour, you're at 100 miles an hour. And when you finish, you start another one straight away.
Yeah, so it's sort of relentless.
So it takes a bit of a while to get into that rhythm, and that's why I was saying that some editors didn't like it. That's the reason. It's just
understood. Yeah, there's no sort of break in.
No, there's no kind of gravy train with it. You know, it's all. But you've got to embrace that. I really hated it to start with, and I tried to leave, and I spoke to them about it and said I want out. And the SP was brilliant, and we had a long chat, and I stayed.
What did they say?
Well, I can't really go into it now, but it was, and he was, and I was quite forceful because I was ready to leave. I wasn't playing any games or anything, and he encouraged me to stay, and I went back and did a second series, and if they film the next series, I'll be on that as well. But and I absolutely love it. It's great fun. But
so it's a mindset. It's almost a mindset. This is a different way of working, and this is how it is. And you get on board with it, and you roll.
And if you don't get it, you're not going to get it. And it's
no.
I didn't get it, but I ended up getting it. And
you got it. You got it. Great. So we've got some brilliant questions. Thank you, everyone. Hello to lots of names that I know. Hello, Catfish. Hi, Celine. Shelley Foster has said edit producer equals office therapist. I like that. And Michelle Kirshner Grant has said it's interesting when we were talking about hours, when Joe, you were talking about how you like your 9 to 6 and then sometimes people work better at night. She says she often finds it works well for her if she stays late, watches through rushes and the cut so far, writes comics, etc., and then leaves notes for the editor to pick up in the morning. She comes in a bit later and that works. So again, that's just about talking, isn't it? And being open about what works for you. And if it's not working, talking about it. And Gavin's got a good question. Gavin Bearfield Boyd, thank you for your question. He's asking, are paper edits used at all?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they are, but not, I would say, when I started as a PD, I remember I was PDing Child of Our Time. That was one of the first big series that I PD'd. And I had 2 weeks as the PD to write the most extensive paper edit in the world. Like, I'd watched all the material and it was literally every roll number and time code and every line of voiceover. I mean, it never ever turned out like that in the edit. You didn't, but it was that's sort of how you used to make programs.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because that surely doesn't work. I mean, you can write it all down, then you watch it, it just doesn't work. I mean, I understand it's like a system, it's an aspiration, I suppose, but
well, it's kind of a process of getting to know your material and kind of working out what is there and a starting point, I suppose, isn't it? But I would say, as Paddy had mentioned earlier, so I don't tend to do those sort of paper edits, but I will log everything. I'm really a massive fan on logging. I choose all the sync that I like. The editor tends to rough cut that and add in their own, bits and bobs and make it viewable. And then I will transcribe all of that and I'll put all the sync in italics, and then I'll write my guide com in bold where I think it should go. And then once I've done that, I'll switch things around and cross things out. And then
I bet you're a fan of stationery, Jo, aren't you?
Well,
highlighters,
yes, but not a fan of post-it notes. I did actually have a huge argument with an editor once who will remember this well about post-it notes. Yes,
I think
they're essential.
I think philosophy-wise, I think there's a couple of things that Jo and you've mentioned, that some productions won't mind the hours you do. They just want you to deliver. They just want you to be in the suite whenever they visit and say hello. But if you could do your job in 1 hour a day and just went in and did it 1 hour a day and made all the viewings and it was all good, then that would be absolutely fine. It's up to you guys in the edit to work out how you guys in the edit want to work. There's no hard and fast rule. And if your editor is a great editor, but he does work at night, then like that edit producer that Jo was talking about, or maybe it was you, Kimberly, leave notes and come in late and make it work for you. It doesn't really matter. The other thing about everything that we make is it's generally never been made before. The format might be established, the stories might be similar to other stories, but this isn't, whatever you're doing has never been done before. So as I said before, it's organic. So you need this, going back to the paper edit, if you need to sort your stuff, if you in your head you want to have it paper edited, brilliant, do it, because that is a starting point. At some point from the paper edit, you're going to end up with a cut. When you end up with a cut with a bit of rubbish com on it, it will end up speaking back to you. You'll have something to criticize. And it's only when you see something in a cut that you can go, that works or that doesn't work. It's only when the execs can see something that they can have an opinion. So at some point, you can be really well prepared and that will give you a head start. But at some point, it takes on its own shape. But that doesn't happen straight away and you can't always rush that. But that's the way it works. The edits, the cut sort of speaks back to you and then you can criticize it and then improve it. You know what I mean?
I love it. I love it. I want to get back in. It sounds so cool.
It becomes its own thing and then you can go, well, I don't like that bit after all.
Yeah.
It was better. So it's sort of organic and you shouldn't try and rush it unless you need to rush it on first dates or something like that. But
I understand.
I
think that's
worry about stuff.
No, be confident. Have confidence. Yeah. Archie Anobu, thanks for watching, Archie. He says, hello, Paddy. Have you been in a position where your edit producer doesn't have the confidence to make key editorial decisions? And if so, how have you dealt with that?
Well, it depends. Yes, I have. But you can talk to that. If they won't make a decision, you got to coach it. Well, you don't have to do anything, but discuss it. You know what I mean? It could come from inexperience, but if you can't make a decision, the chances are it doesn't really matter which way you go with that decision. You know what I mean? If nothing is really speaking to you, and if it's one bit of sync versus another bit of sync, then just go with one bit of sync, and then look at it in the morning. Everything's better in the morning. You know, I don't want to drift off your question too much, but either take control and go, well, I think this one, because an editor's there to have an opinion. You can't, you know, you don't turn up to an edit, and you shouldn't turn up to an edit and an editor says, right, what are we doing? Tell me which bit I want. Which bit am I putting in for you? You know what I mean? That's not a collaboration. I don't work like that. I think it's unfair for people to say to edit producers, what bit of sync next? You know, what's my next thing? You know, where do I put that? You're in a bad spot there. And if you find yourself as an edit producer in that situation, you want to think carefully about, you know, running that up the chain of command, and or talk. Obviously, start by talking to the editor.
Yes.
If you can.
Yeah.
But, try and use your experience to help that person make that decision, because it's not one person's not right or wrong. You know, you should step in. The editor should step in and help. And if the editor can't help, just go and ask the SP. You know.
Yes. No, that's a. I think that's a good answer.
And don't feel bad about it. You know what I mean? If you just don't know which way to go, take advice. They're all there to help.
Be honest.
Yeah.
Jo, one for you. What do you do if the commentary isn't working? Yeah. Any tips on how you work it around?
Well, I would say that your first script is never going to be the final script. I mean, I literally write hundreds of versions of my script. Every day I go into the edit, I do save as and a new date, and the script is restarted. And so I think that you have the attitude that it's guide com until it's even in the voice record. So because as the sync changes, the com will change, or sometimes as the com changes, the sync will change. It's a sort of organic thing as well, the script. If it's not working, because I suppose you have to identify why it's not working. Is it clunky and it's sort of fighting with the sync? Is it not the right tone? Is it sort of too present when it should be a lighter touch? Is it repeating the information that's in the sync and therefore unnecessary? Is it too wordy and too I mean, often I think script is overwritten, sort of almost drawing attention to itself too much, and you need to go back and pare it down. So I suppose it's identifying why there's a problem, and also thinking it's not the finished version, you know, and never ever save your script, even on the last day, as final, because literally the minute you do that, somebody will phone and say, oh, we've checked that fact and it's wrong, and then you'll have to resave as final.
New final. And then tomorrow it's not new.
But with good management, if it's not right, you'll normally get a steer about why it's not right. It's never usually that bad. And as Jo said, if it's wrong, if it's bad to start with, very often you just need enough com to get you through a scene. But if you've got a good team, they'll tell you why it's not. If somebody's telling you the com's not good, it's not good enough for that person just to say that com's not good. They need to tell you why it's not good. The worst thing you can hope for is somebody coming in, a new exec, a nervous exec, to say it's not working and walk out again, because that doesn't help anybody. Why is it not working? So very often, if something isn't working, you want to know why it's not working. And if they haven't said why it's not working, go back to them and ask them why it's not working.
Okay.
They never usually expose that much where they just say it's not working, make it work. It sounds like that might happen all the time, but it rarely does.
I think that sort of comment it happens with music, and it's really frustrating. They just say music wrong, and that also is quite difficult to interpret, because it's like,
not helpful, is it?
We obviously thought it worked because we put it in there, so please explain why it is wrong. And I think it's fine to ask back, as long as you don't ask back in a kind of chippy, defensive kind of way, and you're like, oh, I saw your note that you didn't like the commentary or you didn't like the music. I really need to know why. Can you just, what is it you want?
I think it's quite easy to get precious, isn't it, about your stuff? Also, I think certainly perhaps in the early days, because it's your baby, isn't it? You've been working on it together, and it's quite easy to take offense at notes. And I feel it's important to sort of step back from that and just think about what you're delivering to your client, isn't it?
My editing is kind of my life. I studied editing. I became a runner with the view to become an editor, and now I am an editor, and I love it, and it's kind of part of me. So whenever I get notes that are seemingly critical of the edit, I take them very personally. And actually, I think a lot of people do. I know that Jo takes notes personally sometimes when the com isn't right, and that is a natural thing. People, and you just need to shake yourself out of that, lick your wounds very briefly and get on. Very often the next day is when you've had notes, go home and come in the next day, you have a completely different frame of mind. And very often notes can seem quite harsh, but actually, you can have a note that the scene just completely doesn't work, but you change the first line of com on the way into the scene, no other sync, and all of a sudden the scene's fine. It is literally like that sometimes.
That's a really, really good thing
for
people to hear.
And they or a commissioner, and you throw them off at the beginning of a scene with a duff line of com, you've lost their attention for the whole scene, and it doesn't work. And like I've just said, you change a couple of words in that line of com or rephrase it slightly and don't change anything else, it's great. I've literally had that happen a dozen times. So notes can look terrible. There might be pages of them, but actually you get them done in a couple of hours. You know what I mean?
And people writing the notes have different ways of doing it as well, don't they? Some people are super short and blunt, which can be read as rude, but actually is helpful and direct. And other people, like you say, write paragraphs and paragraphs and makes you feel like, oh my gosh, there's just so much.
You haven't got time because you're watching. You got to do a quick note, the exact quick note. So the fact that it's just blunt, it comes across as being as a criticism, and actually, but it is a criticism, but it's not a personal criticism.
Yes. Have either of you cut gallery directors footage?
Yeah.
Have you, Paddy? Because Abigail Dankwa, hi Abigail, she says, hi Paddy, then what do you feel you miss or wish that gallery directors did on their live cut and the footage you get to help you in the edit? And she says, please be gentle, I'm a gallery director on 24 Hours in A&E.
The thing about I haven't done 24 Hours in A&E, but I've done First Dates, and the methodology is fairly similar. It's fixed cameras, it's camera rigs. A gallery director should never feel like they need to get it right. It's impossible, because it's all about the cut. First Dates, actually, when you look at the date, I'm going to have to bring it to First Dates a little bit, but believe me, I think it will be very similar. First Dates, you very rarely take the line cut, which is the cut from the gallery director. You normally take what they call the ISOs, which are the individual cameras, and cut them to your own liking. So on First Dates, if it's a bad line cut, it doesn't make the slightest bit of difference, because you will never know the bit of sync that they're going to choose in the story. So in 24 hours, you might have a 4-hour, somebody in a cubicle for 4 hours. How are you ever going to know the bit that you're really going to want? I mean, obviously you'll have key bits that that they will use, but the editor will always have access to the ISOs. So I would never feel bad about it. We don't need it because we have all the rushes there anyway, and it all gets recut. So
she should just sort of go with her gut, keep doing what she's doing.
Yeah, you can only do what you can do. You've only got one go at it. Invariably, you're probably going to get it wrong, but it doesn't really make much difference.
Yes.
I'm answering that question based on the fact that I think they're asking about getting the line cuts wrong, but maybe they're talking about missing beats of the story, which would be different. But
yeah, I have worked on 24 Hours in A&E in the edit, actually. So can she explain a little bit more what the question was again?
It was the line cut, actually. I misread it, I'm afraid. She says, hold on one second, where are you, Abigail? What do you feel you miss or wish gallery directors did on their line cut and the footage you get to help you in the edit?
I mean, I think there's plenty of footage on 24 Hours in A&E. I mean, there's normally so much footage. An assembly editor goes in before the editor and the edit producer and does a cut down. They sort of work out which 24-hour period has got enough stories in it to be a program, because they are very strict about the 24-hour rule. any problems that I've had in the edit with 24 Hours in A&E has not been because of the footage directed from the gallery. It's been from, you know, it's a really great story, but then the consent is lost, so you have to dump that story, and because often the consent is gained, I think they gain consent 3 times, once before filming, once during the shoot, and then once when you're in the edit, gain consent again. And so sometimes that you think that you've had a really great story and you've actually got a beginning, middle and end within that 24 hours, but then the relatives or the patient says no, and then
a general rule of thumb, you need something to cut to generally. So a non-sync noddy, if you want to call it that, is always handy.
Noddy.
Sometimes you can't get them on first dates. You just need a look, or you know, the looks pass. So you know, you even need cutaways on something like 24 Hours in A&E in first date. So don't always switch away if they're not speaking. You know, you need those looks, you know, but I guess this person already knows that. So
yeah, well, thank you. Like we're probably nearly out of time, so I'm going to answer one more question. Thank you so much, guys. It's been brilliant. Just an amusing comment from Moby. Long enough so I think you probably know the key is to crack the whip and no talking or tea breaks. And Sarah Rest, thank you for saying, she says, so true, Paddy, regarding your comments on notes, and people shouldn't get disheartened. Everyone has their own opinions. It's hard not to take it personally, but the schedules are so much tighter now. Sometimes it's easier just to make the changes and not take offence.
And the next day is always better. But if you didn't take it personally, I think it's good if you take it personally, because it means you care about it.
It means you care. Yeah, absolutely. Just personally to a certain degree before you go down the pub and then sleep on it and come back the next day. And then I think a really nice question for finishing. Thank you, Natasha, for this. She says to each of you, so what, in summary, what are the best and worst things in your opinion about your roles? Jo?
Well, the best thing about edit producing is it is really, really exciting when this raw material sort of suddenly takes a shape of its own and comes together and is greater than the sum of its parts, and there's a sort of magic to it when you've added all the different ingredients, and it's suddenly, and it's, you know, if it is a fantastic watch, you feel really proud that you've been part of that. So I'd say that's the best bit. The worst bit, I think, is the fact that you have 8 weeks, say, for example, on a 1-hour program, and you invest a lot of energy and time and creative juices on it. And then I always feel like it's a bit like the bubble has burst when other layers get involved, because you've created a kind of thing that you and your editor are quite proud of. And then suddenly, actually, your opinion doesn't really count anymore because you're outranked. And that's one of the reasons why I now series produce, and hopefully will go on higher up as well, is you sort of you know, it's sort of letting go is actually, when you're a creative person, and as Paddy said, when you care, is kind of quite difficult. So that's the worst part.
Good answer.
I think what the best part of the job is turning something that wasn't anything into something and move, you know, and it's, you have sort of created something. It's been a massive team, but there is a huge sense of satisfaction. It's even more satisfying whenever you've had times when you go, I don't know what to do with this. There's some rushes here and I haven't got a clue where to turn. Whenever you come out of those dark patches, and sometimes that does happen, you know, you look at some rushes and you go, I don't know what this is going to look like when it's done. And those very rushes come back and they're some of the best things that you've ever cut. That's incredibly rewarding. And that's what I love about, I mean, the scenes that I cut aren't generally as bad as that, but it's the sense of accomplishment is fantastic. You know, turning something that's just a load of rushes into a moving story is brilliant. Major
respect for both of you for what you do, and some really lovely comments coming in. Have a look on our Facebook page afterwards, but Gregory Jones saying thank you, this was great and it's really made me miss work.
Oh, well, Paddy's working, but I'm not working. I feel your pain, but hey,
Yeah, we'll be all right. It's picking up, you know, that we have some roles on our books, so everybody should go and have a look at those. But yeah, just stick with it, everyone. We can ride it out. And thank you so much, Jo. Thank you, Paddy. Really appreciate your time. It's been so much fun. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching. If you missed any of this at the beginning, it's going to be on our website. I think it stays on Facebook for a bit, and then we'll put it on our Talented People website. Hopefully come along next week for whatever on earth I'm going to be planning then. But thank you ever so much, everyone, you two, for your time, and we will see you again really soon. And go enjoy the sun if you can.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you. Thank you ever so much.